Good afternoon and welcome to Tea and Chat, or really I think it should be iced tea and chat. I haven't got any iced tea, but I have got some water, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm going to have that. It's too hot for tea I think at the moment, but I can probably manage one later. But it's good to see you all. We've got some poems today and we've got some prose, and hopefully that will reflect, some of that reflects the current temperatures we've got. It's 30 degrees here where I am at the moment, so it's quite warm. We've got some suitable poems that go with that. If you are brave enough to venture out into the heat, just to let you know that all our libraries are now open without restrictions on time limits, although we do encourage all our borrowers to continue to wear masks and to use the test and trace app when they come in. But there's no browsing time limits anymore, and you won't have to stop at the door. So we look forward to seeing as many of you are brave enough to venture out into this heat, or perhaps as it gets a bit cooler at the weekend, pop in the library and select some books. Or we've got the summer reading challenge going again for children, aged 4 to 11. So if you know some children or perhaps grandchildren, then please get them along to start the summer reading challenge. They have to be between 4 and 11, and they can pick up a pack from the library. So we'll start off with some poems, and the first poem I've got, well, it's called Roundabouts and Swings, and it's about arrival of the fair in a city. Now I know in Salisbury it's normally in October, but often there are summer fairs across Wiltshire, and I was reminded reminded me of this poem today because I was reading about the fact that they're setting up a little mini golf course in front of the Guildhall, which looks really good in Salisbury. So this reminded me of that. So this poem is by Patrick R. Chalmers, and it's called Roundabouts and Swings. It was early last September nigh to Framlingham-on-Sea, and 'twas fair day come tomorrow, and the time was after tea, and I met a painted caravan down a dusty lane. A farer with his waggons coming jolt and creak and strain. A cheery cove and sunburnt, bold of eye and wrinkled up, and beside him on the splashboard sat a brindled terrier pup, and a lurcher wise as Solomon and lean as fiddle strings was jogging in the dust along his roundabouts and swings. Good day, said he, good day, said I, and how do you find things go? And what's the chance of millions when you runs a travelling show? I find, said he, things very much as I've always found, for mostly they goes up and down, or else goes round and round. Said he, the job's the very spit of what it always were. It's bread and bacon mostly, when the dog don't catch a hare. But looking at it broad, and while it ain't no merchant's kings, what's lost upon the roundabouts, we pulls up on the swings. Good luck, said he, good luck, said I, you've put it past a doubt, and keep that lurcher on the road, the gamekeeper's is out. He thumped upon the footboard, and he lumbered on again, to meet a gold dust sunset down the owl light in the lane. And the moon she climbed the hazels, while a nightjar seemed to spin, that Pharaoh's wisdom o'er again is soothed of loose and win. For up and down and round, said he, goes all appointed things, and losses on the roundabouts means profits on the swings. I really enjoyed that poem. There's Roundabouts and Swings by Patrick R. Chalmers. And there's a bit of the romance of a travelling life there, which I know sometimes is possibly overdone, but I did like the themes behind that poem. I thought it was really nice. So obviously today is really hot, and in times gone by there were things like ice carts that sold ice in the streets that you could buy, particularly in cities in America. And obviously you could get, I expect you've seen these ice houses in country houses where they made ice. So this book is, this poem is called The Ice Cart, and it's by Wilfred Gibson. Perched on my city office stool, I watched with envy while a cool and lucky carter handled ice. And I was wandering in a trice, far from the grey and grimy heat of that intolerable street. Sapphire berg and emerald flow, beneath the still cold ruby glow of everlasting polar night, bewildered by the queer half-light, until I stumbled unawares upon a creek where big white bears plunged headlong down with flourished heels and floundered after shining seals through shivering seas of blinding blue. And as I watched them, ere I knew, I'd stripped and I was swimming too, among the sea pack, young and hale, and thrusting on with threshing tail, with twist and twirl and sudden leap, through crackling ice and salty deep, diving and doubling with my kind, until at last we left behind those big white blundering bulks of death, and lay at length with panting breath upon a far untravelled flow, beneath a gentle drift of snow. Snow drifting gently fine and white out of the endless polar night, falling and falling evermore upon that far untravelled shore, till I was buried fathoms deep beneath that cold white drifting sleep, sleep drifting deep, deep drifting sleep. The carter cracked a sudden whip, I clutched my stool with startled grip, awakening to the grimy heat of that intolerable street. That's great, wasn't it? So he's waiting for the arse clock to come along, he drifts and dreaming about icebergs, which is, I can understand that at the moment, to be honest with you. Okay, so my next poem is by William Blake, and we went to a wonderful exhibition in the Tate, and we saw William Blake's artwork, but of course he also did a lot of poetry, and this one is called Infant Joy, and we've just started at the library doing trial rhyme times for small numbers of children, and I did one the other day, and we had 4 little baby girls, and they so enjoyed it, and it was so lovely to see them smiling, and hopefully as we edge back towards normal, we can expand the rhyme times back again so we meet people, parents and their babies back again. So this poem is called Infant Joy, and it's by William Blake. I have no name, I am but 2 days old. What shall I call thee? I happy am, joy is my name. Sweet joy befall thee. Pretty joy, sweet joy, but 2 days old. Sweet joy I call thee. Thou dost smile, I sing the while. Sweet joy befall thee. One of the things that's nice when we have the rhyme times is you always know which names are in fashion, and names come around from time to time. And often we have summer and autumn, and sometimes we have a winter as well, so sometimes we get most of the seasons in for the names. Okay, so sometimes we have some prose, and I think I've read from Gilbert White's letters before, but this letter in particular, or these letters in particular, are from 1783. And this was when there was a very hot summer, and the weather was influenced by a massive volcanic eruption in Iceland. So it just shows you what goes around comes around. This has happened more recently, isn't it? And there's 2 letters here, and well, I'll read the first one and you can see what you think about this. The summers of 1781 and 1783 are unusually hot and dry. In the former of these years, my peach and nectarine trees suffered so much from the heat that the rind on the bodies was scaled and came off. This may prove a hint to assiduous gardeners to fence and shelter their wall trees with Matsuo boards, as they may easily do, because such an annoyance is seldom of long continuance. During that summer also, I observed my apples were coddled, as it were, on the trees, so they had no quickness of flavour and would not keep in the winter. This circumstance put me in mind of what I have heard travellers assert: they never ate a good apple or apricot in the south of Europe, where the heats were so great as to render the juices vapid and insipid. The great pests of a garden are wasps, which destroy all the finest fruits just as they are coming into perfection. In 1781 we had none. In 1783 there were myriads, which would have devoured all the produce of my garden had we not set the boys to take the nests and caught thousands with hazel twigs tipped with birdlime. We have since employed the boys to take and destroy the large breeding wasp in the spring. Such expedients have a great effect on these marauders and will keep them under. Though wasps do not abound but in hot summers, yet they do not prevail in every hot summer, as I have instance in the 2 years mentioned above. In the sultry season of 1783, honeydews were so frequent as to deface and destroy the beauties of my garden. My honeysuckles, which were 1 week the most sweet and lovely objects the eye could behold, became the next the most loathsome, being enveloped in a viscous substance and loaded with black aphids. The occasion of this clammy appearance seems to be this, that in the hot weather the effluvia of flowers in fields and meadows and gardens are drawn up in the day by a brisk evaporation, and then in the night fall down again with the dews in which they are entangled. The air is strongly scented and therefore impregnated with the particles of flowers in the summer weather. So what's interesting there is that really it's like gardeners through the centuries. Gilbert White's having a bit of moan about wasps and aphids and everything else that's in his garden eating everything. So nothing changes, does it? And this was over 200 years ago. So I'll just mention a little more, another letter to it about him, and he's writing in reference to the volcano that erupted in 1783. The summer of the year 1783 was an amazing and portentous one, and full of horrible phenomena, for besides the alarming meteors and tremendous thunderstorms that affrighted and distressed the different counties of this kingdom, the peculiar haze or smoky fog that prevailed for many weeks in this island, and in every part of Europe and even beyond its limits, was a most extraordinary appearance, unlike anything known within the memory of man. By my journal I find that I noticed this strange occurrence was from June the 23rd to July the 20th inclusive, during which period the wind varied to every quarter without making any alteration in the air. The sun at noon looked as blank as a clouded moon, and shed a rust-covered ferruginous light on the ground and floors of rooms, but it was particularly lurid and blood-coloured at rising and setting. All the same, the heat was so intense that butchers' meats could hardly be eaten on the day after it was killed, and the flies swarmed so in the lanes and the hedges that they rendered the horses half frantic and riding irksome. The country people began to look with a superstitious awe at the red, lowering aspect of the sun, and indeed there was a reason for the most enlightened person to be apprehensive, for all the while in Calabria and parts of the island of Scilly were torn and convulsed with earthquakes, and about that juncture a volcano sprung out of the sea on the coast of Norway. So you can see that during that time there was lots of rumours and news of what was going on around the world, and lots of eruptions and things that were changing the weather, and that was back in 1783, so that sounded almost as hot a summer as we're having now. So that was one of the letters from Gilbert White writing the natural history of Southbourne. Okay, so let's move on. So my next poem is called My Shadow by Robert Louis Stevenson. And obviously shadows are very appropriate in these long summer days. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very, very like me from the heels up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow, not at all like proper children, which is always very slow, for he sometimes shoots up taller like an India rubber ball, and he sometimes gets so little there's none of him at all. He hasn't got a notion of how children ought to play, and can only make a fool of me in every sort of way. He stays so close beside me, he's a coward you can see. I'd think shame's to stick to nursie as that shadow sticks to me. One morning very early, before the sun was up, I rose and found a shining dew on every buttercup. But my lazy little shadow, like an arrant sleepy head, had stayed at home behind me and was fast asleep in bed. Children are always fascinated by shadows because they follow them around, just like they're fascinated by if you've been with a small child and they're suddenly caught by a gust of wind and they look really surprised and don't know what to do about it. So that was by Robert Louis Stevenson, and that was called My Shadow. Okay, so moving on, I thought we'd have a bit of John Donne and No Man is an Island. I think this is particularly appropriate at this time, as we're all relying on each other to do the right thing perhaps in some instances. And I think we do rely upon each other far more than we realise, and far more interdependent than we probably realise. So this is No Man is an Island by John Donne. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the man, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. There we go, that was John Donne, and that was No Man is an Island. Okay, so I thought we'd have a little, well, they're Japanese poems, well, they're very short pieces, and they're called haiku, and it's Japanese short poetry. And they're only 3 lines and 17 syllables, and there's 5 syllables on the first line, 7 on the next, and 5 on the third. And often they rely on simple phrases that capture images in nature. So the one I was going to read to you is called The Old Pond by Basho Matsuo. Breaking the silence of an ancient pond, a frog jumped into water, a deep resonance. That's it. So obviously you could get through quite a lot of those. So that is a haiku, a Japanese short poem. Okay, so I thought I'd finish with a nice limerick, because I know we like our limericks, and this one is about an old person of Nice, and this is obviously by Edward Lear. There was an old person of Nice, whose associates were usually geese. They walked out together in all sorts of weather, that affable person of Nice. Doesn't make any sense really, does it? I don't know why there were geese hanging about Nice, but there we go. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed my selection of poems today on this rather hot day. Just to let you know that if you like books and poems and finding out about books and libraries, and you like a bit of humour, our book chat page is worth having a look at. This is the Salisbury and Wilton Library book chat page. There are also book chat pages for Chippenham and Melksham, and there's lots of articles that people have put on there about different books they're reading and reviews, and also the odd poem and the odd cartoon, and there's always something on there to make you laugh. In the meantime, as I said earlier, the libraries are reopening more normally now, so if you go onto our Facebook pages and look at our website, it will give you more details about that. And next month, Basil and Steph and myself and Pete will be back with more poems for tea and chat, so look out on Facebook for that. In the meantime, I hope you can stay cool, and I hope you have a good week. Thank you for listening. Bye.